Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandy Haas, and I am the Executive Director of UWRA and will be serving as your host today. In addition to our distinguished speakers this morning, we have Program Coordinator Rick Deluge and Karen Holden. And joining us also is our technical staff, Jürgen Patel. It is my pleasure at this point to introduce a member of the Committee on Financial Matters and serving as our program coordinator. Please join me in welcoming Rick Deluge for the purpose of an introduction of our distinguished speakers. So Rick, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. One of the things that this program is generally trying to address is, what does it take for us to have a good retirement in terms of what are the services that are available, what are the financial aspects of the of our lives going forward. Can we afford to have the retirement that we all would like to have? So we've got three excellent speakers. One of them is trying to still navigate getting onto this call. So we hopefully he will join us. But I'm going to introduce each speaker individually, and they're going to each speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions that you can address to any one of them that you wish to. So we'll start with Helen Marks Dix, who serves as the State Issues Advocacy Director for AARP Wisconsin. And she is very involved in legislative and administrative issues, and a graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School. So she's a Badger, and has worked in the area of elder law care center, and has worked in the legislature as an aide to a state senator, and is very familiar with the resources that are out there for aging. So without any further ado, we'll introduce Helen Marks Dix.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. We're going to talk today about the resources that you need to retire successfully, but I'm not going to limit my comments to just money. There are other things that you need to have to retire successfully and to live what I call the bonus years successfully. I've been doing advocacy in the field of aging since about 1989. And I have to say, I was a mere 44 when I started to do this. I have stayed in the field of aging or closely related fields. And now I am 75, still working full time, still very opinionated, and still keeping a track of what's going on in the elder field. And so it's of course been now tempered by my experiences and those of my friends, as well as the academic. I'm going to talk about two things for the overall presentation. One is where to get the help that you need. And so that is one thing. The second thing that I want to talk about is how to live your best life. And so those are the two resources and attitudes I bring to this. I'm going to defer to John Sauer about a lot of the things that have to do with a long-term care, but I want to talk about what you can expect as you age. Most people do not age in the way that the stereotypical portray in our society tells you. One is that, we all have these pictures of old people and we're all in nursing homes. Only about 7% of people over age 85 are actually in nursing homes. Most of us are going to stay out of nursing homes for an extended period of time. And so how many people need personal care help? Well, once again, for people 65 to 74, it's only 4% of people that need some help. 8% if you're between 75 and 84, and 21% if you're over 85. That means an awful lot of us are going to do just fine outside of institutions. When John talks about long-term care, I'm sure he's going to tell you about other things other than nursing homes, but I want to focus mostly on people who stay in the community. The one negative that we can all anticipate, however, is that most of us are going to at some point end up as caregivers. It seems like either you have been a caregiver, you are a caregiver, you will be a caregiver, or you're the person needing the care. So in talking about resources that are available, I'm going to give you some information about caregiving. The last thing the other part of my talk will be about what people really want when they retire. And that's, I think most people want to have a purpose. They want to live meaningful lives. The fact that we're a little slower and that our endurance is not what it used to be, or even that we have physical conditions that limit some of our activity, does not mean we cannot live purposeful lives. And people really are looking to have meaningful purpose in their lives in the later years. Now, I work for AARP Wisconsin, which is a social mission organization, and our roles are basically getting education out to people, doing advocacy for older people, but we also do a lot of volunteer activities because of that need for people to find purpose. You can advance the slide, please. And so I'm going to give you, the next slide is some of the resources that we can give you. In terms of education, next slide, please. In terms of education, there's a lot of caregiver information. Caregiving is something that we're going to all do at some point in our life. And so this is some good basic work. I give you information about the fraud network because it seems that scams are addressed to older people an awful lot. And unfortunately, in a time where we're working hard to preserve and spend our resources wisely, an awful lot of older people get ripped off and get scammed out of money that they could use for their own care or well-being. So I gave you information on this slide about the fraud network, where you can report fraud, you can get educated about fraud and find out what's going on in your community. AARP also runs something that I think is a very meaningful program, which is Friendly Voices. And Friendly Voices is really many older people, while they are not hurting financially, are socially isolated and without friends. So social isolation and loneliness has become a very important issue for older people. And Friendly Voices, if you're looking for a purpose, Friendly Voices is a great campaign because it allows you to go into connect by telephone to people just on a regular basis, maybe weekly, maybe monthly, so that people aren't quite so isolated. And there's a whole page of volunteer activities that there's a volunteer opportunity page, depending on what your background and skills are, that if you're looking for purpose, volunteering is a great way to do it. And last, I put up our website because our website tells you what we're up to and what we're advocating for. So you're an older person, you're looking for resources. We can advance the slide. We're looking for resources because what resources are available to help people in the community? Well, there are lots of resources for older people who want to stay in the community. There's rental assistance if you need financial help. There's help with electrical bills. There's programs to get benefits, to get internet services. There are a myriad of financial help programs. There are also lots of programs to help support family caregivers, people who need transportation assistance, and most of these programs for people over age 60 can be accessed through something called the Aging and Disability Resource Centers. Aging and Disability Resource Centers exist in every county. There's actually, I should say, they cover all the counties. They're not necessarily physically located in your county, but they're the great place to start with any question you have needing help and assistance. If the ADRC itself does not provide the help and assistance, it's often provided through referral because they know who the reputable lawyers that do elder law in the community are. They know who can deal with the hearing impaired when you have a medical challenge. They have all kinds of information. And so I always send people and tell them that's a great place to start. They run all the programs under the Older Americans Act, and I put their phone number up on the website at 608-240-7400. The second place I send people is the United Way. United Way of Dane County has a 211 service, which means you can call them. They don't provide direct help, but they link you to everybody that can possibly help you, regardless of what your challenge is. So these are two great places to start with any problem you have as you age, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, whether you're looking for a support group for a particular disease, any questions you really have, those are the great two places to start. So let me talk a little more about, this is for the challenges of aging. So let me go to the next slide and talk about the bonus years. As we have aged, and as I have aged, the longevity of older people has increased. And for the most part, we are reasonably comfortable, not wealthy, but comfortable. We've learned to live for the most part within our means and methods. So people want to have more purpose than just getting up in the morning and wondering what you're going to do all day. And what's really nice is in the bonus years, as I call them, we're getting close to 25 to 30 extra years in our lives as compared to the generations before us. Those are your years, your time, and your decision on what to do and when to do it. Now, I'm not one of these people who looks at the commercials and talks about super seniors and you see George Bush jumping out of an airplane to celebrate his 90th birthday. You're never going to get me to jump out of a plane to celebrate anything. And that's not a reasonable expectation. But for George, that was fine. And so it's your time. Do you have a hobby? Do you have something you want to do? It's very, very liberating. There's a really an important role for older population in a good functioning society. We're the mentors. We're the people who have time to volunteer. We come with a wealth of skills and backgrounds. And unfortunately, our society tends to devalue the contribution of older people. There is an awful lot of knowledge and experience among older people, and we pay a huge percentage of the taxes and do the work that keeps communities going. So I want you to think about what your background is and what your skill is and what you have to contribute. Because I think the pandemic has brought out two things that are very important when you think about how you're going to deal with your retirement. One is that there's a tremendous ageism in our society because very early in the pandemic, there was this sense that was pitting the lives of older people against the re-emergence of the economy. It is not, we are not, I had a little button that said, I'm not dying for the Dow. We can't disregard the value of older people. But on the other hand, with the lack of workers and the lack of people in the workforce to keep things going, the value of older volunteers has just become incredible. Right now, most of us are still in our homes, but as the economy reemerges and programs reemerge, we're going to have to talk about what we do to get the society back to a working average. Now, you can afford to retire. People later in this program are going to talk about how much money you need. John's going to help you, tell you where to spend it in long-term care. But the truth of the matter is, there are ways you too can contribute in schools, in the volunteer ombudsman program, working for local nonprofits. And I think your longevity and your well-being depends not only on your money, but on your purposefulness and how you spend those years. So I am going, I know that when John and I had a little chat before we did this presentation, he talked about, when I was talking about the bonus years, he said, the bonus years and your attitude towards aging and your right for choices also plays into how and which of the programs for long-term care you might choose and what fits you the best. So I know I'm going to get questions and I'll be glad to answer them, but I'm going to pass the torch right now to the next speaker.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted, and I wanted to just take a moment to introduce John Sauer. John has spoken to this group before in the past, and he is the Chief Executive Officer of Leading Age Wisconsin, which is a consortium of about 500 not-for-profit facilities in the state that provide care to older individuals. And I had given him a few questions earlier that I think he's probably going to address. So we'll just turn it right over to John at this point and let you have at it.
Thank you, Rick. I'll go at a fairly rapid clip. I appreciate the comments that Helen made and look forward to also hearing hopefully from Tim. So I thought my charge today really was to talk about some of the trends in long-term care and some of the recent developments, and I will do that. I agree with Helen that it's certainly much prefer meeting in person, and we've all done our share of these remote meetings. And I just find them to be helpful. It's certainly better than not coming together. But I love the in-person meetings and the chance to interact with you, which I've done in the past. I will just take a minute just to reflect about the journey that long-term care providers have been on over the last over a year and a half, and we're hoping that with the booster shots and more and more people becoming vaccinated, that will certainly reduce the number of people who become serious ill or pass because of COVID. So just a minute of reflection on that. I'm going to go quickly. I'm going to talk about who's in long-term care, who's providing the care, a little bit about the cost of care and how things are changing. And then as we all move closer to perhaps needing long-term care and services, some things to reflect upon. So the population, as Helen said, if you're over the age of 65, you have about a 30% chance or higher to need long-term care sometime in the rest of your life. It is the over age 85 population that really consumes most of the dollars for long-term care, and that population is growing dramatically, and that's going to change how we as society look, how we care for people, where we care for people, and that's something that is unlike any time in our world history, where the number of older adults will be over 25%. So let's talk a little bit about that. I just quickly drive by this issue. Is not only are we getting older as a society, but more people will have dementia or Alzheimer's characteristics, that population growing by about 18%, according to the Alzheimer's Association, just in about a 6-year period. So that's something also to pay attention to. When I look at the population growth, we can get lost in statistics, but the thing that we look at as representing the provider community is the workers that are available to care for older adults and persons with disabilities. And what you see in the green line really is the available workforce. And you see how that is in no way keeping up with the rate of increase in the number of older adults or those who are going to be needing long-term care in the future. And that's going to be a fundamental challenge for us, and how we're going to address that. And so it obviously means that the ratio of caregivers to those needing care is going to drop dramatically as we age. So let's talk about a survey that 4 associations, including ours, did right before the pandemic hit. And what that showed is that there was a workforce crisis in long-term care. About 23% of positions were vacant. And this report is online. We can share it with you. And Sandy has my handout if you would like to look at some of the details. But basically, it's showing that significant caregiver shortage existed even before the pandemic. And what we've seen in more recent years with the pandemic, a lot of caregivers, a lot of people working in long-term care across the country have elected to do something else because of the challenges. And frankly, especially in the early days of the pandemic, fear about their ability to remain healthy and be able to escape the virus. So over the course of the pandemic, we've lost a number of caregivers and others working in long-term care. And you only have to look at some of the data and some of the information. Everywhere you go, there are jobs opening. So the workforce crisis is not just isolating on long-term care, but it's basically throughout the workforce. There's a shortage. And when you look at the ads that come to my house, or as I see in town here, starting wages are very similar to what wages are for certified nursing assistants. And frankly, I would argue it's a lot easier work, both mentally and physically. So the workforce challenge is pretty significant. Now, Helen and I had a chance to be appointed to the governor's caregiver task force, and we spent over a year looking at recommendations. We don't have time to get into those now, but significant options and alternatives were advanced about how we help informal, non-paid caregivers and how we help paid caregivers to be paid more of a living wage and to make the work more meaningful. So we don't have all kinds of time for that. So I'm just going to mention that in passing. But I do want to talk about some of the changes that are happening in long-term care. And even though we've had a significant increase in the number of older adults, those over age 65 and 85, and that trend obviously is continuing, what we've seen is a real reduction in the number of people living in nursing facilities. And that has been more than matched by the increase in assisted living. So what we see now is the people living in assisted living today look very much like those who lived in nursing homes, 10 years ago or more. And so the trend is more services being brought to people outside of a nursing facility. And I would argue that that's been helpful both for the consumer, both for older adults, and it provided options. But the options don't just stay there. They're also available in home care, outpatient therapies and things like that. And we can talk about a fundamental shift that has gone on in our state. So just in the last 6 months, we've had nursing facilities reduce their capacity, in part because the difficulty in finding staff. And that's caused some backups in hospitals, as it's more difficult in this day to find a nursing facility for people who are in hospitals. And just since December, we've lost over 740 nursing facility beds, and that's the equivalent of 11 nursing homes that have closed in the state over the last 6 months. So that trend, I think, will continue. If it does continue, we're going to look at a shortage of nursing home beds by as early as 2028. And that's going to put more pressure on the rest of the long-term care system, including more of a demand for assisted living capacity, where they're able to serve people at a higher level of acuity. So some things to take into account. Now, our state has done a really impressive job of expanding state-funded long-term care services. So we now serve for low-income people who qualify for Medicaid through the family care program. We now serve over 55,000 people in this family care program, which majority of people are not in nursing facilities. They are served in the community, they're served in assisted living, and they have a variety of services. I need to stress, this is for people who have limited resources and they qualify financially for this Medicaid or family care program. Now let's talk about some of the cost of care, and this is a study that's done nationally, and it's looking at Wisconsin in our numbers. So in terms of what does it cost for community care or for facility-based care, and you see that the current rate for a nursing facility in a private room, if you have a year stay, we're looking at over $100,000 in a private room. We're looking at a monthly fee for assisted living under $5,000, and it varies pretty dramatically based on the area of the state and also the level of intensity of care and services you need. For example, if you're in assisted living and you need some help with bathing or dressing, but you are able to, other than that, largely care for yourself within your assisted living apartment, the cost will be less compared to memory care, where you basically need ongoing 24-hour a day supervision. So here are some of the costs to give you an idea of what is the cost of care, the monthly cost of care. And that's something I'm sure you're all thinking about. If it comes time for I'm going to need care and services, obviously you see the cost of nursing facility, and that's for people who really need the high intensity care and services. So at our board retreat in January of last year, we had a presenter talk about, as we try and put together models to serve people, what do the economics look like? And one of the reports was the data would show that about more than half the people have saved less than $500,000 for retirement, and then they said, well, if you don't have enough, less than 100,000, I should say, for retirement, 53%. That's a startling number. I suspect through the UW alumni program, the people listening to and watching this program have saved more than that. But it gives you a reflection of, as a country, how are we going to care for people who perhaps have not saved enough for retirement. when asked what is your plan, 9.4 million baby boomers said they weren't sure. And almost 40% said they're going to rely on Social Security and Medicare to fund their retirement. One thing it looked at is, well, how do people want to spend their retirement in terms of the setting? And as you might expect, most people want to remain in their own home with their spouse or partner. If that's not possible, in an apartment, and then with paid help at home. But there also is interest in congregate living for those who need it. And so that is something that we plan for, and we look at options that are available in terms of attracting people who might want to live in a congregate setting where they have the peace of mind of being able to access care and services. One thing we know going into the future is that it will not look the same as it does now. In our retreat for our board, we know in terms of the consumer, those listening to the call, to the program, you're not going to want to move from your home if you don't have to. We have to figure out how we can provide healthcare to people where they live now, or in their assisted living or apartment or independent living. How more services will be brought to those individuals utilizing technology and the like. So wrapping up in terms of future directions and observations, I really think that care and service options will expand and evolve, and it will be based on workforce availability, the coverage of certain programs, both private insurance and government and reimbursement systems will dictate how care and services are going to evolve. Private payers will always have more options than those who rely on Medicaid or family care. It is difficult to find a nursing facility to accept someone who is on medical assistance directly. And that is a reality as providers have had to balance their books, because Medicaid traditionally has been a very inadequate payer to pay for the cost of care and services. Other observations: higher levels of care and services will be provided in non-traditional settings. I see that happening more and more. More services being brought into assisted living. Congregate care settings will offer an attractive advantage. I do think that organizations, continuing care campuses or life plan communities will have an advantage over others in that they will offer consumers additional choices without having to leave the campus. And I think, as Helen said, we're going to have to inform. We're going to have better informed consumers who will expect and demand more from the provider community, and I think that's a good thing. So realizing the time, that was a few of the observations where I see things going, and I appreciate the invite to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We will want to remind people that are listening, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer box, and we'll try to convey those to the appropriate speaker after we hear from our third speaker. Our third speaker, I think, is on the telephone. Is Tim, are you there?
I think I've just unmuted myself. Can you hear me, Rick?
Yes, we can hear you. So just a few words about Tim Schiefelbein. Tim is holds a bachelor's degree in personal finance from UW-Madison. He's been working at the UW Credit Union Investment Services since 2018, and works in several different offices at the UW Credit Union. So we do have his slides ready to go, and we have him on the phone. So without further ado, Tim, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you to the UW Retirement Association And Sandy, I know you're there helping out. Thank you as well. We were talking a little bit before while this was ongoing, and we all just love technology these days. I am sorry for the slides being a little bit different and where we're going. Thank you again for your help. And like John said, thank you for the invite to speak this morning. So indeed, Sandy, if you want to move forward, you can go past the second one as well. And that's just my smiling face and a little disclosure around our industry and within investment services at UW Credit Union. So primarily, we wanted to speak with everyone about the things that we see coming into and through retirement. One of the biggest things that we talk with people about, which is not too surprising, is that we're living longer. Probability that a healthy 65-year-old would live to the following ages, as you can see, and as you all know and have experienced through wonderful medicine, through other advances that we've made. There's a really reasonable chance that we're planning for a 20, 25, and 30-year retirement. And of course, if that is part of a spousal or a partnership relationship, it's even a bigger chance that at least one of those members would live even longer. In the next slide, we see inflation being a conversation. I know that's talked about, and John just talked about that with the cost of care. This is just in general, where we talk about inflation being a factor on our purchasing power and, of course, our retirement portfolio and what that may be like over time. This is actually a fairly hot topic that obviously has some changes throughout each given year. We went through a pandemic and still are, and the effects that has and has had and will have over the next number of years. 3% hasn't been really touched in terms of inflation for 2 to 3 decades. And now it's well over 3%, and we'll have to see where that goes. But one of those unknowns that we talk about, from longevity to inflation, and what that means for our purchasing power and the ability to afford our retirement lifestyle. So the last unpredictable slide there that we'll get to next is the unpredictability of the financial markets. As you can see, given this is just one index, but within the S&P 500, a 5-6 year period there with massive gains in the late 90s to a 5-year period with very minimal to this most recent period leading up to the pandemic, and the unpredictability of a financial market to sustain that return is, quite frankly, a little bit out of our control. So we work on here at the credit union, working with our members and our clients about the things that we can control. And let me, Sandy, ask you to go to one more there, talking a little bit about the markets and their return. This is what we call the sequence of returns risk, where you can see these returns down here at the bottom, investor A or investor B. The returns are just flipped if you just look at them year 1 and year 10, year 2 and year 9, and so forth. So, the average, just mathematically speaking, is the same, but we end up with drastically different portfolios over even just a 10-year period, depending on how we start retirement or how we start a specific period of time, whether that's retirement or next stage or even pre-retirement, how the sequence of returns risk can really affect our portfolio. So again, as it relates to what we can control, what we can do about that. Sandy, I'll have you go one more to developing a sound investment strategy. And that's where we work with our clients about developing, and figuring out, what are your investment objectives? What is your time frame? What is your risk tolerance? And we'll dive in to each one of those in a more detailed meeting. We don't have the time for that this morning, but every individual, every couple, every family has specific needs, goals, wishes, wants, budget, you name it. And that's where that unique planning is a part of what we do to to and with each individual couple and family. So what we talk about then next is your asset or a drawdown strategy. So, sorry, next slide there, Sandy. And just to tell you up front, you know, there is no perfect strategy because we do things, we plan for something, and life can throw us a curveball, and we plan for risk mitigation. So one thing we want to acknowledge up front is that that's where consistent checking and rechecking and then rebalancing or re-strategizing makes a lot of sense. The decisions you will make largely depend on these three factors, right? The value of your portfolio to retirement, and actual investment returns, which will play itself out, and then the amount and timing of withdrawals as you plan for. It's like I tell my young boys, you know, there are things that we plan for and things that we don't plan for, and that's true whether you're in elementary school and college, career, or retired, or anywhere in between. Some of the strategies that we consider in particular, we'll go into each one of these, are the life expectancy method, the 4% rule, and a 3-tiered strategy. I don't really have anything, a slide or otherwise, for the life expectancy method. This is otherwise known as your RMD table, or your required minimum distribution, that you may or may not be familiar with, but that's just increasing the withdrawals as we age and as we get closer to life expectancy. So we've got a slide there for the next one, which is the 4% rule, which is something that you may have heard about. The 4% rule was a study done way back in the 80s and into the 90s, dealing with, well, could we take 4%? How about 5, 6, 7? And this slide, there was really no study done on 8%, but you could just do the math with $1 million portfolio and taking that 4%, that 6%. And as you can see on the bottom there, it does assume a 5% annual rate of return. So we're not expecting to blow the returns out of the water. We're not expecting to make a lot of money in retirement, and being fairly conservative. And then the withdrawals are adjusted by 3% annually for that inflation we talked about, and how long that would last by taking 4, 6, or 8%. So again, just a different strategy. One thing that, you know, this is adjusted for inflation, but it's not necessarily adjusted for one of those big changes in life, of that big curveball, if you will. The last strategy that we talked about there on the page was the 3-tiered strategy, and one that I think finds a lot of traction with our clients because it's flexible. As you can see down below, I'll go over the tiers in a minute here, but you know, it's a manageable long-term strategy. It provides a way to balance both your current income and future growth. They title it as a disadvantage, but I think it's a good thing, requiring active management, working with yourself or you know, your financial professional. Depends on market performance, so we have to monitor that, and then challenging to coordinate which parts we're taking at which tier. The tier 1 is just your short term. That's your immediate bucket, and it might be 2 to 3 years. I've stretched that out to even 4 and 5 years if you're a little bit more risk averse. Your conservative assets go here, and they can draw on that regardless of market condition. You know, whether the market's up, down, sideways, fixed income, bonds, CDs, whatever are paying what. Your tier 2 or your medium term bucket could last anywhere from, like it says, 3 to 10 years, but maybe 4 to 6, 5 to 7 years. It's mostly fixed income, possibly some stocks, but so maybe some larger names and companies that aren't as volatile. Then your tier 3 would be your long-term growth of 7, 8, 10 years and beyond. And then the next slide there, Sandy, shows an example of what that would actually look like with, again, this couple who has an $850,000 portfolio, and they want $45,000 a year. You can see that tier 1 at the bottom has a conservative investment making just 3. And you would need to put in that $206,026, which would withdraw $45,000 for the next 5 years. Your tier 2 would be that fixed income investment making 4%, where you you would put in $169,000, 338. And then after 5 years, it'd be worth that same 206,000 that we just had in tier one, to allow for that 5 years of $45,000 of income again. Your growth investments would be what's left there in tier three, which would be that $474,000 and some change. And then that would grow for the next 10 years to be worth your $850,000 after the 10-year period. And then we would just redo that cycle again. And of course, along the way, things change in that 5-10 year period where we'd make adjustments as needed. But that's an example of how something like that would work. So transitioning kind of into, where to spend the money, our next slide talks about which assets do you spend? You've got taxable assets. Maybe those are individual stocks, bonds, certificates, just savings and money markets. Maybe it's other capital investments that you've made over time. And quite frankly, there are a lot of different strategies that people use. Some people choose to spend taxable assets so that the tax deferral on your IRAs, your retirement plans, lasts a little bit longer. Should you liquidate a winner, something that's gained a little bit more before you liquidate a loser, something that's lost $1 or $2? And these would all be questions that we would go over individually and would be specific to your situation, be it your tax bracket at the time, other expenses, other goals. Just to be clear, it's not an easy decision which ones to necessarily spend first, but that's why I think it helps to have other eyes and ears on the situation. Like it says, considerations would be your tax consequences, opportunity costs for what you could do with that asset otherwise, and then emotional implications, whether or not that's an asset that has some emotional tie to what you've done or an investment that you've had for a while. Maybe it was even an inheritance that you received from a loved one as well. So the next, slide talks about which distribution method is appropriate for you. And again, very personal and specific question relative to what is your age? How liquid do you need your funds to be, and at what time? We talked about market volatility versus preservation of funds and conservatively keeping a certain amount available, your income needs at the time, and your tax situation. So specifically, I know a lot of the discussion from Helen and from John has been around resources for long-term care and needing that. And let's dive into that for just a little bit. So obviously, there are a number of ways, and both Helen and John have talked about different ways to pay for this care, but the next slide highlights the number of ways that we can, so I won't repeat much or any of these, but we all know what solutions are out there. Let me dive into this next slide that John already covered. It's actually from this same study. If I saw that disclosure on John, your slide, it was from Genworth's Cost of Care website as just a completely third party, and we have no compensation or other agreement or other with Genworth. Their long-term care resources are pretty wide ranging. And you were talking, John, about different stages, areas, geography within Wisconsin, and where you go for care. That might be countrywide, right? It's nationwide. So take a look at their cost of care website, and you can plug in most large enough municipalities and see what the cost of care might be and is projected to be based on their research. So paying for long-term care is our next conversation. And in our list of different ways we could pay for care, some people think, well, Medicare will pay. And just to be clear, and this might be old news or just a reminder for some of you on the call today, but Medicare's federal health insurance provides limited coverage for long-term care services. So it pays after a 3-day hospitalization for full cost for 20 days. Up to days 21 through 100, it will pay partially. And then it really doesn't pay anything after 100 days of care, not for the personal or custodial care either. And then the home health benefits are limited. And this would be a much deeper conversation around your Medicare, your supplemental coverage, and so forth. Medicare, the next slide talks about where Medicare pays and how much Medicaid, and John, you touched on this there at the end that I heard that a large majority is covered by Medicaid in terms of nursing home expenditures, and it's the largest public payer of long-term care services. But as we talked about, and as you know, it's means-based and it limits where you can receive care. Talk briefly about Medicaid eligibility next, which is, really based on the state. It's a federal program, but then run through states' guidelines and eligibility criterias. Individual income must be less than the cost of the care. Again, in some states, an income cap applies, and in most states, the asset limit is about $2,000. Now, the assets that are not counted, as you see below, would be your house if your spouse or partner is living. One car they can keep, household and personal belongings to continue. Term life insurance is something, or of course, something like a burial plot or any funeral expenses. So one thing we talk with people about is Medicaid planning. And that means using assets that do count, your savings and other things, to purchase assets that don't, be it a life insurance policy or something. You can work on a longer term plan, which is transferring assets into something like an irrevocable trust or giving assets away. The key here is planning and planning ahead, because there are look back periods, typically 5 years, where if you give assets away and then some situation happens where you are in need of Medicaid assistance, there's typically a 5-year look back period. Again, that does differ a little bit. That would be here in the state of Wisconsin. Most of what we just talked about above was funding out of pocket, or how can we accumulate and use our assets to pay out of pocket. And as John also mentioned, there are more freedom to choose the care if you're paying privately. Might be ideal if you can pay for care indefinitely, but we have to be willing to liquidate asset if necessary. It might impact our ability to pass on the assets to our family. And of course, relying on family members or government may be our only options if we're planning on paying out of pocket. Lastly, we would talk about long-term care insurance. You do have to be in reasonably good health to purchase a policy. The premium is based on your age and benefits features that you choose. And it's typically triggered when you hit those 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, or chronically or cognitively impaired. So some policies have an elimination period or a waiting period, and then benefits can be paid for as long as necessary until those policy limits are reached. What we've seen a lot in recent long-term care insurance, I won't say advances, but just changes, is that benefit periods are decreasing quite frequently and severely. Used to be that a 4 or 5, 6 year benefit period was long, and right now it seems like 2 and 3 years is as long as some of those are paying out. The next slide talks about the long-term care features of any long-term care policy. So the benefit amount, right? How much is payable on a monthly or daily basis? How long will benefits last in your benefit period? We talked about an elimination period. How long do you have to wait until you actually get benefits? So is it 50, 60, 90, 100 days? The location of care. How can you receive that care? Home care, assisted living, memory care, nursing care. And then inflation protection, keeping that benefit up with rising costs. The next slide talks about 2 different types of long-term care coverage, and that would be a hybrid life and long-term care policy versus a traditional. And I wanted to call everyone's attention to the fact that there are multiple types of long-term care policies out there. Again, this won't be the time to dive into these details, but whether or not a traditional long-term care policy that pays in the event of long-term care only versus a hybrid life insurance policy that pays for long-term care as well along the way might be worth considering. So lastly, as you're preparing a long-term care planning checklist, you'll want to explore the services and costs in your area, like the others Helen and John have talked about. What about your own personal finances? We talked a little bit about, and then talk to your family. Ask ask your parents if they're around. Ask your siblings. Ask your children about how and tell them what your plans are and what you'd like to see happen. Comparing options like that with someone like a financial professional, and then prepare any healthcare directives. Sorry, I said lastly, but the last slide would actually talk about those specific healthcare directives. 3 roles would be a power of attorney, a healthcare surrogate or an agent, and then any legal guardian in those instances to have authority over your care and personal property interests. So last slide is just simple a thank you, and appreciate the time. I kind of flew through a little bit of that at the end because there's a lot to cover, and I know you've heard a lot already today. Thank you again for letting me be a part of this, and I'll turn it back to you, Rick, and if you have any questions for the panel.
Okay, I don't see a lot of questions coming in, but now is the time to put those out there, folks, if you have a question. Just a couple of comments and sort of a question, I guess, is that, one thing that a lot of people tend to not always remember is that, right now, if you're a married couple, you're receiving 2 Social Security checks. And of course, if one of the spouses passes away, you only receive the larger of the 2, the remaining spouse. And, that becomes an important concept to keeping people solvent financially, because, that could amount to, anywhere from $1,300 to $2,000 or something like that per month that suddenly you don't have anymore. I don't know if any of you have run into that kind of a issue, but it does seem to be a factor. I know my mother-in-law and father-in-law had that situation. They managed very nicely when they were both receiving their Social Security checks, but when the husband passed away, the wife received less money, and then she had to start dipping into her invested money. And then as she needed more care and some memory care later in life, and then finally in a nursing home at the very end, she actually ran out of money 2 months before she passed away. And I guess that's probably okay. That's about as close as anybody can plan for this kind of thing. But it is a factor, I think, that some people have. So any of you have a comment on that? And I'll take a look here at what other questions we have coming in.
Rick, that's a great point. This is Tim with the investments there at UW Credit Union. We see that a lot, Rick, and thank you for calling it out. One thing, and we talked, of course, on life insurance and long-term care at the very end, but those hybrid life insurance and long-term care policies can be a way, or even what we just call a traditional or straight life insurance policy, because often couples, families, partners think about what might happen upon the second death of a couple, because the first one's still there and is still having some income come in. But if there is going to be a significant drop in income, or you are depending on both of those, an insurance policy could make some sense on both individuals. That's a great point.
I also should point out that when you make decisions about your pension plans, which none of us talked about today, you also have certain elections that you make very early on, and take a good guess about who's going to outlive who and for how long in making your elections to keep the income stable.
That's a real good point. I also know of another a couple who they elected only, I think the husband elected only a 15-year state pension because he wanted to have a good income, because they wanted to go to Arizona for the winter. Well, when he passed away after right around the 15-year mark, there was nothing coming in for the spouse. So she had absolutely no income from that retirement anymore. So it does make a big difference in what you've elected. And I think that all goes into this whole thing. So thanks for mentioning that, Helen. We do have a question for John Sauer. What role do you see technology changing the future for care services? Things like Apple Watch that might be able to detect falls and calling 911 for a person, and other kinds of technologies that might be out there to help people either in their own home or in an assisted living facility. You're muted, John.
You'd think after a year and a half, I'd learn to unmute. There are a number of technologies that are emerging, and I can start with just simple telehealth, which I've had doctor visits through telehealth. I've gone in and I've gotten blood work done. In the future, I think the blood work done, for some tests is going to happen remotely, and that technology exists to some degree already. But we also have things that allow people to live in their own home, even though they may be showing some signs of cognitive impairment. There are technology that will make sure that the oven and the stove are turned off. There's technology to make sure that somebody has risen from their in the morning, and whether or not they've gone to the bathroom, whether or not they've taken food out of the refrigerator. I mean, just ways to monitor to know that this person is safe, is having their nutrition needs are being met. There's monitoring if there are falls and somebody is needing some help. And then there's even monitors that go so far as what we call smart toilets, where they're able to do urine analysis and other medical tests, simply as people utilize the restroom or the bathroom. So there are more technologies that are emerging, but one of the things that we've seen during the pandemic, and this is not a eureka one, but just the gift of keeping people connected. It's through Zoom and Skype and everything else, but somehow to make that easier for people who are more technologically challenged or cognitively challenged, to make that connection with family and friends, and to do it in the most simplistic way possible, is opening up options for people. And what we've seen during the pandemic is how it's almost more important than your physical health. It is your emotional well-being, your connectedness, your purpose in life. And that's where I see some real advantages coming for technology.
I have to agree with one thing John said very, very strongly. There's a very old technology called the telephone, and we tend to underuse it and checking in with neighbors and friends and just having a 15-minute conversation about the weather, a daily wellness check, and having people feel connected to their community is better than any vitamin or exercise program. And so we shouldn't overlook the old technologies. We shouldn't overdo the new technologies, because we don't want to infantilize older adults, because we want to stay as independent as we can. And yes, these things can be helpful, but they shouldn't be reduced to jail-like provisions where every movement in your house is known to an overprotective child.
I think some of those technologies are important for people that let's say the son or the daughter may live 400 or 500 miles away from where the parent is, and keeping track of that parent becomes more and more of a challenge without those kind of technologies and without the phone calls. Those are things that are out there. Let's see. Karen, do you have another question that came in, or You're muted.
Well, there was one, I guess, short question, which is what is the cost of services at UW Credit Union for the advice described? And then I do have another question.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. At the UW Credit Union, within our investment services department, we have 9 advisors that meet with our members throughout Dane County and the Milwaukee area. Well, throughout the whole state, to be clear, but that's where our branch locations are primarily located. And we'll sit down with anyone on a complimentary basis to explore what we talked about initially, which is what are your goals? What are your objectives? What does that look like for you, your spouse, your partner, your family? And then going forward, we come up with recommendations, and we work primarily on a fee basis. That would usually be a percentage of the assets that we consider under our management. We do have a number of different ways to work with clients based on which particular solution we're working on. That could be asset management, that could be financial planning, that could mean insurance, like we talked about at the end, which all have some differing and varying degrees of ways that we are compensated. To be clear, we're going to meet with you until we figure out what the solutions are that we would propose. And we're going to meet with you until we figure out whether that makes sense to move forward with those. And there will never be a cost or a fee imposed until we've agreed upon a solution or what makes sense in that particular area or part of your plan.
So I haven't, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, there was
I
a
was
question. There was a question that came in that's related to this in a sense, and that was, what is any of you have any sense of the financial stability of long-term care insurance companies? And I was talking with John a little bit before we actually started the program, and telling him that I had gotten from my long-term care insurance company a notice that I was going to have to pay more money to keep my same coverage, my same daily benefit, or I would, if I kept paying the same amount that I would end up with an 11% decrease in coverage. So I don't know if that tells us anything, but it seems to me that there is some stress on the part of long-term care insurance companies. I don't know if anybody's got any other experience with that or comments that they would like to make.
When I was running the Elder Law Center, we often got calls from people who had paid in for years on long-term care insurance, and the premium got so high they could no longer afford it, and they dropped it within the year of when they really needed it, or within 2 years of when they really needed it. So it's a really strong long-term care and long-term investment that you're taking a high risk. And I think I would refer people to people like Tim to say, look at your family history and your healthcare, because the amount of money you're putting in for a return you might not get is pretty extraordinary. I'm not a big fan. I'm also not a big fan of divesting in order to make yourself poor enough to be on Medicaid, because you really, number one, you're taking a benefit that was designed for people who don't have money. And number two, you divest and you don't get that money back. And often if you had the money, you'd be better off making home modifications or doing other things than going into a nursing home. And in a way, it isn't really fair to the nursing homes that people make themselves artificially poor. So when I was an attorney, I would explain, when I was a practicing attorney in elder law, I would explain to people that you could do that and it was legal. But I also explained the risks and said I would not do it because I did not think it was a proper thing to do. I would refer them to an attorney who would do it.
Thank you. Good points, Helen. You bring up really good points about the insurance side and divestment into different strategies. And specifically, Rick, with regard to the stability of a long-term care insurance company, that's why there are independent rating agencies out there, AM Best and Moody's and S&P, who rate insurance companies. So look into what they do financially and how stable they would be. I see the same things, Rick. Clients that have an option on the table to either keep the same premium and decrease some benefits, or keep their same benefits and realize an increase in their premium. It is a hard conversation, Helen, in support of what you said. It's difficult to see that continually over that long term. You invest a lot of money into that particular plan. There are some, and I just worked with a member 2 weeks ago on what's sometimes called a contingent or a non-forfeiture benefit, which would allow for you to receive benefits up unto the amount of premium that you've paid. So the example that I was working on with this client was the premium was increased by such an amount that the insurance company, and this is by law, I'm assuming by state law, I actually don't know if it's state or federal, but I believe by Wisconsin state statute within the insurance industry, to say if we increase your premium by a certain amount, we need to offer you what's called a contingent non-forfeiture benefit that would allow for you to at least receive, let's say she's paid $24,000 in premiums over the last 10 years or 12 years or whatever it may be. And she would receive at least that much in benefit should she need the care. And that would just cut off the policy for future benefits and allow her to not pay the premium, but would also give her some of the benefit that she has actually paid for. So look for that in a policy, and understand that the one slide I did touch on, but we didn't go into detail. And this is, I think, one of the main things that people get out of meeting with us when it comes to long-term care planning is, does a traditional sense of long-term care, like Rick referenced and like I just talked about, make sense when you pay a premium for a policy, you end up using it or not using it, and then that's done, versus a policy that might have a benefit, such as a life insurance policy, whether or not you need long-term care services. And to be very clear, I don't know that answer for anyone until we start meeting and talking about what your priorities are, what your finances budget mean for what you'd like to see happen for that particular plan.
Okay, John, I have a question for you, and it's a question as my wife and I start looking around at community residential facilities. There's different options out there. You can buy, well, I think it's called a life lease arrangement, where you put a larger amount of money up front, but then your estate or your kids or whatever are going to get 80 or 90% of that back when you're no longer living there. Then there's also a lot of the facilities have a lower price, but you don't get any of it back. And I guess it's probably actuarially, there's probably no difference. If you knew how long you were going to live in the facility, that would make all the difference in the world. But I think that's, I don't know if you have some thoughts on that for people to think about as they consider that.
Yeah, I think, part of it is almost like a long-term care insurance, but to be clear, it's not an insurance product. So if you go with a larger endowment fee, many times those organizations will offer a refund schedule. So it says, it might be 90% refundable. It also happens that, and then you pay a lower monthly rent. The nice thing about, entering into a facility, a campus-based organization with multiple levels of care is, there's a sense of obligation that they're going to care for you. And you're not, going to be asked to move if your level of care, escalates. And so that's part of the planning process. In the refundable schedule, I know organizations will, if you are running out of other dollars to pay for increasing cost of care, the amount that you put in for the entrance fee can be drawn down to, if you say you needed nursing home care, which again is twice as expensive as assisted living. So I think you're right, Rick. It is a decision that the individual needs to make in terms of, okay, well, if I take, for example, the value of my house and I put it into an entrance fee, what does that leave me with, and this monthly fee, and then looking at the budget. And so it's kind of a personal decision. Many organizations will offer, the option, and not all have that entrance fee option available. Although some of the larger life plan communities, or what we used to call continuing care retirement communities, will make that available.
The other thing to remember is many of us who live in condominiums that were designed for older people that are all on one level, you can hire the same services to come in often that you get at assisted living when you have to hire extra services. And what you gain by staying in your own place is the opportunity to reverse mortgage. And, reverse mortgages have their pluses and their minuses and their uses and bad uses. But there is a difference between leasing a place and owning a place if you can get the same level of services.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of all this is, if you're a single retiree and or your spouse has passed away or whatever, then I think it becomes more, as we were talking earlier, companionship and being with other people and all of this kind of thing. But then you have to balance that with, can I afford it? Do I want to spend all my wad here in this continuing care facility? So it's a bit of a balancing act as we go forward. And John, as you gave us some numbers there. You have any kind of a estimate of what you think, let's say, assisted living costs are going to go up per year for the next 10 years? Is it 3%, 4%, 5%? Any thoughts on that?
I think, honestly, I think the increases are going to be larger than what we've seen in the past, and it's largely driven by the labor factor. We started out 2 years ago with the average certified nursing assistant making $13.50. That number in a few short years is now looking at $15. And I frankly think, and for providers to be competitive, we need to look at paying certified nursing assistants, those who provide most of the hands-on care under supervision of an RN. I'm talking on the nursing home side. I think we need to move that wage to $20 an hour, and that's what's going to drive the cost increases. So not all of long-term care is labor related. Some of it on the campus-based organizations, bricks and mortars, and the housekeeping, dietary, laundry, maintenance, food, etc. But labor is direct care labor especially is going to be I think a big driver of cost increases. So you were talking about 4% increases in life insurance or long-term care insurance premiums. I think the cost of care that we just went through with the nursing and reimbursement negotiations with the state of Wisconsin. The one estimate was direct care was going up 5%. Now, on assisted living, it's not as staff intense. The level of staffing availability in assisted living is increasing because acuity is going up, but it's not staffed as rich as a nursing facility. But that's going to be the driver is labor.
And probably also demand, don't you think? Because there's more of us older people who would be interested in some of those facilities or in need of some of those facilities as the population ages. Although I've often believed that us good old hippies from the 60s might surprise everybody and start creating our communes again. But, if you just look at the numbers that you started with of how many of us are going to live beyond 85, which is the point at which people need a little more assistance for the most part.
Okay. Karen, was there another question that had come in? Maybe there's a couple there.
Another question came in about the effect of some of the reductions in nursing, nurses and nursing reductions, and what is the impact on continuing care facilities? Probably referring to the type of care nursing, long-term care communities might be, residents might be receiving as the nursing shortage and certification problems continue.
Well, one thing on nursing homes is they are highly regulated. And so there is the reason we've had a drop in the number of nursing home beds, despite the need for nursing home care, is staffing. So right now, we probably have 90% of nursing facilities that are really limiting their admissions right now. That's causing some backup in hospitals as they try and find post-acute care placements and services for hospital patients. And we're in weekly conversations with the hospital associations, Department of Health Services, about, as COVID continues to create overcapacity issues for hospitals, how do we in long-term care, relieve that pressure? One of the things we can't do is we can't accept admissions for people for whom we do not have adequate staff. And that is for RNs, and it is for, certified nursing assistants. So, that is another reason I think that people are looking at other parts of the continuum to access. Maybe not because they don't need that level of intensity of services, but frankly, it's just difficult in some areas or many areas of the state to access that care right now because of the staffing issues. We've been supportive of things like funding more nurse educators through our colleges and universities, so we can turn out more nurses, hopefully, who want to work in long-term care, because that's where a great need is. But, we all hear these stories of some nurses going down to Texas and making $200 an hour, for a certain period of time. So I wish I had better news to say about the staffing issue, but that's really curtailing our ability to serve people right now.
And there's always a tension between John and his providers and their dislike of regulations, and the advocates who put a large emphasis on quality of care and the need to have a higher ratio of professional staffing and professional training. And well, I think John and I respect each other over time. This is always a question that comes up for debate, is how much professional staff do you need? And what should the quality of care measures be to make sure that the economics of lower level staff rather than more professional staff isn't what's driving the decisions?
I think that is, this discussion is important because I think when people talk about staffing in long-term care facilities, they don't separate out the need for higher paid for lower level, lower skilled staff. So, you know, raising to $15 or $20 an hour is important for them, but is not going to affect the availability of highly trained nursing staff, and how that conflict shapes the kind of services that one wants to have provided to us and to the community in the future is an important debate. As you point out, Helen, how much professional services do you need in long-term, or maybe we need different types of long-term care communities?
We had another question that came in. It's more of a housekeeping question, and that is, I guess, one of the listeners wanted to know if, Helen, if your slides can be kept out on our website related to this presentation, because when we record it, it goes by so fast that people can't write down the web addresses and so on. Do you have any issues with that?
Nope. The reason I made them is so that people can go to those various places and check out those websites. So if you want to post it, go for it.
Okay. And I'm sure that Sandy heard that. So there was another question, I believe, that was directed more toward John. Are there any criteria that you would use in evaluating or deciding on either long-term care insurance? You know, you can go there and look at it, I guess, but what else should somebody be looking at that's considering this kind of care?
Well, if you're talking about, you know, an assisted living or a skilled nursing facility and trying to evaluate, is that a place for me? You know, I think, you know, personal visits are key. And really just, you know, don't, you know, listen to whoever's doing the tour, but really observe with your own eyes what kind of interaction is happening. Now, things are a little stifled because of COVID and the restrictions and things like that. But, you know, I would try and, you know, utilize any option that's available for me to see firsthand, you know, how people are treated. When people, you know, walk through the campus, do the staff know the names of people who live and work there? If you can talk to some of the staff who work there and ask them, well, how long have you been there? What do you enjoy most about your job? When you talk to residents or family, I think talk about, well, do they understand, you know, what you view as your purpose in life, and do they help you move in that direction? Is this more than just a place where I you know, I live, or is it a place where I thrive and they, you know, they treat me and respect me as an individual? I would ask, well, so who exactly owns this organization or, you know, facility? Is it governed by a local community board of directors as a nonprofit? Is it owned by a stable group of investors? Is it owned by someone from out of state? You know, how long has the manager, the administrator, or the executive director been there? How long has the director of nursing been there? You know, what do you think is a good number in terms of your staffing for number of caregivers per individual? And then, you know, how do you what makes this place a vibrant place? You know, what activities do you have? What you know, what connectedness do you have to local churches or organizations or theater or, kind of what makes this a place, that I want to live. Because yes, a good number of people go to nursing homes for short-term rehab. Their length of stay is, a week or two, and that's a big number of people. And if that's what you're looking for, then maybe some of the amenities, aren't as critical. And in those cases, however, I think you still want to know, who's providing this care and how long they've been doing it. I think it's not maybe just so caught up in the physical appearance, but really, how are people treating each other, and what level of respect and recognition that the people who live there are individuals, need to be treated as such.
Okay, well, we are approaching the end of our time, and I think we've got all the questions answered that came in.
Can I ask a question?
You sure can.
John, I have power of attorney for a friend who has early Alzheimer's. And I was surprised to learn that long-term care facilities could demand that the resident move. And I'm just curious, when we think about planning our long-term care, we think, well, we're going to choose and stay there. But what are the risks that indeed behaviors or care demands might mean we have to move or be moved, and protections?
There are situations where the organization is going to have to judge, is this person's level of care beyond their ability to really meet that level of care. And in cases where that happens is in cases I have personal knowledge of, where the resident becomes so combative, and in case I'm going to talk about is someone who was relatively young, early 70s, with a form of dementia that manifests itself in just very combative, dangerous situation, and where it posed a threat to other residents who lived there. And after consulting with various clinicians, they just decided they were no longer able to care for that individual. So that's one of the examples where people are no longer there, able to live there. Another example is some assisted living facilities will say that they will not do two-person transfers, that they say that is not something that they're staffed for or equipped for. So if somebody is going to need that level of total care, where they need two people every day in terms of getting out of bed, going to the bathroom, any other activities where they need two people to assist, some assisted living facilities will say they're not able to do that. So I do think that's a good point, Karen, to add to the list of as you're evaluating is what is your criteria for how long you're going to be able to care for people.
And I have to say, Karen, the lawyer in me compels me to say that evictions from nursing homes are just like evictions from everywhere else. And there are legal rights, and there's a way to challenge. The same thing if you're being evicted from a hospital because Medicaid or Medicare will no longer pay or authorize. There are legal rights around all these things. There are a couple of organizations like Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Elder Law Center and the Elder Benefit Specialists that will help with some of those things. But it isn't, the nursing homes are not obligated, it isn't once you're there, you have squatters' rights for life. On the other hand, they can't just kick you out willy-nilly.
Okay, well, those are good comments, and I think I remember our personal situation with my mother-in-law, we had to move her because she started getting worse dementia and needed to be in a more of a memory care place. And, you know, you don't want to leave somebody in a facility where they're not going to be taken care of well either. So you have to evaluate those things as you go. Well, I think we will call this program to a close, and I want to thank each of our speakers, Helen and John and Tim, for being with us today. We wish we had a few more people on the call, but as I said, this has been recorded and will be placed out on our association website so that people can access it later. If they were out playing golf this morning or something like that, they can look at it later on. So, Sandy, any closing comments? I think as everyone signs off, you'll be sent a evaluation form will pop up for you to evaluate today's program. And when we get that, we'll share it with our presenters as well. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the association, I want to thank all of you for your time, for your knowledge, for sharing with us. I thought it was a great conversation. For our audience, the recording and the slides, Helen and John's slides, will be posted probably within 7 to 10 days once everything gets done. So please take a moment and look at the valuable information that has been posted there. Again, thank you, everyone. And we will say so long for now, and we will see you at our next seminar.